Okay, thanks.
Senator Liu?
Senator Hancock.
Yeah, just to pick up on that, I think that's a great point. I mean, in a way, the state has the ability to have an overview, and it should be able to have a vision of what best practices are across the state and really across the country. And I think it would be wonderful if we launch a new program when we've spent all this bond money, if we could do some really important reaching out to communities and then maybe even coaching as the process goes forward. So many communities, I think, aren't aware of the different choices in school buildings.
That's right. And my comment is, Mr. Hancock, you have moved from the State Allocation Board to a private practice to help schools maneuver through the process.
Yes, ma'am.
And just from your own experience, would you agree with what Senator Hancock's observation is, that many school districts need, in fact, have asked for help to navigate the process?
Yes, absolutely. Frankly, if they didn't, I wouldn't have a firm and employment at the moment. But I think these comments are really very important and have occurred before. There's been discussions about how the state can improve its outreach to districts. There's no question in my mind, having worked for 10 years with school districts to help them navigate the program, that that it is support for them is critical. There are many who do it well, many who do it within the resources very well, within the resources they have, and some that just simply are lost and left behind. And we've heard examples of that this morning. Outreach is very difficult. The Office of Public School Construction, when I was with it many, many years ago, was an important concept to the office. But of hundreds of districts participating in the program at all different levels, and a handful, really literally 100 or 150 people in the office, many of whom were concerned with just the mechanics of the program, was very, very difficult. Many ideas have been brought forward. Finding ways to offer support through county offices of education has been discussed. And in fact, San Diego County has had a very strong office from the County Office of Education support offered to school districts. In some ways, it could almost be a model. But of course, the county offices need help, support, in order to be able to do that. But I think it would go a long ways towards leveling the field for everyone concerned in facilities, whether they're in highly impoverished districts or very wealthy areas.
Thank you. Just a couple of comments here. We started this conversation in 17 years ago, the Green Bill, to simplify the process with lease agreements. Now here we are in 2015, and I just showed you that chart about how difficult it is to maneuver, and I too sit on the State Allocation Board, and I'm confounded with the complexity of the programs that we've created. Can you propose any changes to this? What are the shortcomings of what we are doing, and how can we fix it?
Well, I'll try for the first one. In terms of the regulatory process, one of the ideas that graphic that you showed was developed as part of the Department of General Services expert working group, which I was a member of. And one of the concepts that we should potentially think about that came out of that was what's called a one-stop shop. And it's similar to what local building departments do when you come in for a building permit and you are basically directed and you go, through planning and zoning and come, your building department and come out with your permit, and it enhances development and streamlines the processes. So could we create a regulatory structure that combined the functions of many of the agencies within a single reviewing agency? That's one piece. Another one would be similar to the grant idea. Don't review projects at all at the state level. Provide funding. And so part of what goes on now is that districts actually submit their construction projects to verify supplemental grants, a whole variety of things. So, large stacks of drawings coming to the state, reviews, et cetera. Don't do that. Don't have it be a project-based program. Have it be a grant-based program where you might get whatever. You'll hear some other ideas about funding, but take the reviewing piece out of the state level to simplify that.
I think there are many areas within the existing program that could be reviewed and simplified. Simplification is really challenging because when you get into it, almost inevitably someone gets left behind when you simplify a process. In fact, the reason that our processes almost inevitably evolve into more and more complexity is because we attempt to address the outlying situations. No one wants to leave a district behind. So laws are passed, regulations are adjusted, the state allocation board makes findings that that accommodate a circumstance in the best way possible, and yet add another layer of complexity to the program. So I'm not exactly sure what to draw from that, except to understand that being simplifying the program is very difficult because there are almost inevitably folks who will not benefit from that.
I know sometime in the packet that was presented to us, and I think it was the Little Hoover Commission in 2007, recommended that the State Allocation Board take as a model the state's California Transportation Commission. I don't know whether or not you're familiar with the state's Transportation Commission or have any comments about how you simplify the process. No. Okay. Well, maybe somebody else does as we move along. Okay. Any other questions from this panel? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, the next panel will deal with the current budget proposal. I'd like to call up our four panelists: Jeff Bell, who's the Program Budget Manager from the Department of Finance; Juan Morales, who's the Principal Program Budget Analyst from the Department of Finance; Paul Galazewski, Principal Fiscal and Policy Analyst with the LAO; and Jamil Naqvi, Fiscal and Policy Analyst from the LAO. Gentlemen who'd like to begin.
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members. I'm Jeff Bell, the Program Budget Manager for the Education Unit, Department of Finance. I'll start with a couple opening remarks, and then I'm going to turn it over to Juan Morales here from our unit. Thanks very much for the opportunity to talk to you this morning about our opening proposal for the conversation about facilities in the state of California. As you might imagine, what you've read thus far is significantly different than what we have in the state. Before I worked for the state, I was in the Navy for 10 years, and what we would call this is a sea change. It's a significant difference in how we think about doing facilities in the state of California. And what you're going to hear Juan talk about will be a significant difference in how the relationship is between the state and school districts. The components and the ideas that we've been talking about, and really some of these ideas and thoughts we've talked about for a couple years. We're laying a little more detail into those in the conversation this morning, and we'd like to share those thoughts with you now. So with that, Juan, would you share those
Good morning,
ideas?
Madam Chair, members. Again, Juan Morales with the Department of Finance. Shortly after the funding was exhausted for the core new construction modernization programs back in 2012, the administration began noting significant deficiencies with the existing program, such as program complexity, which you've heard a lot already about, small school district disadvantages, and the continued reliance on debt issuance as a financing mechanism. Again, the program was intended to be a simple program. In fact, back in 1998, there was a total of 28 pages worth of regulations that was simple. Now there's about 129 pages worth of regulations. The program has grown to be overly complex, has become costly for both the state and school districts, and it doesn't provide the adequate local control when school districts are designing their plans. Also, the first come, first serve system really disadvantages small school districts that don't have the dedicated personnel or resources to be able to navigate through the multi-state agency approval process. And lastly, the administration has also raised concerns with the continued reliance on debt issuance as a financing mechanism. School bonds cost the general fund approximately $2.4 billion annually in debt service. We project to be paying over $2 billion for the next 15 years, and it's going to take about 30 years to pay off the existing debt. Continuing to pass bond after bond will inevitably at some point crowd out the ability to fund other education and non-education priorities and needs through the general fund. Since the program was started in 1998, the state has also experienced an unprecedented level of state debt issuance for school facilities. In total, $35 billion has been approved in general obligation bonds for state assistance toward school facilities. And at the same time, Proposition 39, that was approved by the voters in 2000, has significantly increased the district's local ability to finance school facilities. Prop 39 reduced the threshold from 2/3 vote down to 55%, and has allowed school districts to pass upward of 80% of the bonds. So in order to begin addressing the concerns, we held a series of meetings with school districts and stakeholders in the fall to discuss how a new program could be designed. Input from the stakeholders, as well as reviewing what other states do, contributed to the guiding principles that were part of the governor's budget. As a result, the administration recommends that financial support for a future program move away from debt issuance and should instead be limited to supporting facilities investment for the schools with the greatest need. The governor's budget recommends that funding should be targeted to districts with the lowest per student assessed value. Prioritizing school funding to districts with low wealth will ensure that all districts have similar access to funding for school facilities. The governor's budget also recommends that funding should be prioritized to health and safety projects and projects that relieve severe overcrowding. Once eligible projects are identified, then the state's share of the project cost should be based on a sliding scale that takes into account local capacity to finance projects. Given that the funding will be limited to districts most in need, the governor's budget recommends exploring a number of tools to help school districts be able to fund their facilities at the local level. First, the governor's budget recommends expanding the school district's funding capacity by raising the tax rate levy caps and caps on local bonding indebtedness for Proposition 39 bonds. Under current law, Proposition 39 bonds are subject to tax limitation of no more than $30 per $100,000 of assessed value for non-unified districts, or $60 per $100,000 of assessed value for a unified school district. School districts also cannot issue debt in excess of 1.25% of the total assessed value for non-unified, or 2.5% of the total assessed value for unified school districts. In order to provide greater access to local financing, consideration should be given to increasing these caps at a minimum by the rate of inflation since 2000. In addition to general obligation bonds, the governing board of school districts may currently levy developer fees when there is a clear nexus between new housing developments and the need to provide additional facilities for the incoming students. Current law establishes 3 categories to determine the amount of fees the district can levy, which range from a fraction of the project cost all the way to 100% of the project cost. A new program should establish 1 developer fee for all districts and cap the amount of fees that can be levied for a specific project at a level between the current level 2 and 3, or approximately 75% of the project cost. The governor's budget also recommends expanding the allowable use of restricted maintenance funding. Beginning July this year, districts will once again have to deposit 3% of their total expenditures from this general fund for the maintenance of their facilities if they receive funding under the current program. Rather than requiring that these funds be used solely for routine maintenance, districts should also have the ability to use these funds for modernization and new construction if they determine that that would be a better use of the funding. The administration is also proposing to provide additional tools for charter schools to meet their facility needs. The governor's budget recommends augmenting the existing charter school facility grant program, which provides funding to charter schools to assist in paying for rent and lease expenditures. The governor's budget recommends permanently lowering the free reduced price meal requirement from 70% down to 55%, which also serves as a concentration grant threshold under the local control funding formula. Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to be here to present governor's budget. We look forward to continuing the dialogue with you and the stakeholders in the coming months to shape a new program with these guiding principles in mind. With that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Okay, let's go on to the LAO, and then we'll have questions from the group.
Morning, chairs, members, staff. Thanks for having us here this morning to talk about school facilities. Jamil Naqvi with the LAO, and here with Paul Golozewski, my colleague. You should have copies of our report in front of you. I'm not going to cover the whole report because the gentleman before us already covered a lot of the background and history. I'd like to start around page 4 with problems with the existing system. I want to offer kind of a brief overview of our concerns with the current system, and then offer a new proposal for a new school facility program. So to start out with, we concur with a lot of the governor's concerns about the existing program and some of the longstanding concerns that others have raised about the existing school facility program. In particular, we have issues with the excessive complexity of the existing system and the burden that places on our school districts as well as state agencies. We're concerned with the current financing mechanism of debt issuance. We believe the current first-come, first-served system of distributing funds doesn't necessarily serve our districts with greatest need. And we also share concerns about the disparities in property wealth that have been articulated that exist among different districts in the state. Additionally, one of the overriding concerns that we have about the existing program is that the state does not currently view the cost of school facilities as an ongoing expense. And we feel that that's inappropriate because we feel that school facility needs, modernization, new construction, maintenance, can and should be looked at on an annual basis. These are recurring, predictable expenses that can be budgeted for and considered on an annual basis, and we think that's how the state should look at school facilities. And the current funding mechanism that we use, which is a series of periodic bonds, we feel does not appropriately reflect that ongoing nature of school facilities. So next, I'm going to start on page 6 and talk about some of our proposed design elements that we believe the state should look at when designing a new school facility program. So as I mentioned, we believe that the current program doesn't serve districts well, and that the state should consider establishing a new system. So we'd like to lay out a few broad design principles that could guide that process. First, we would like to propose creating an annual school facilities grant. This would provide funds to all school districts in the state on an annual basis. This would be based on the estimated annual need for school facilities in the state on a per student basis. The state would set a minimum share of funds that it wants to provide to every district and provide those funds on the basis of student attendance. There wouldn't be a specific local matching requirement. However, districts would be certainly free to use whatever local funds are available to meet their local needs. These include local general obligation bonds, developer fees, and, if necessary, operational revenues. Secondly, reflecting our concern with some of the disparities around property wealth, we recommend an adjustment for local resources, primarily property wealth. Essentially, the state would provide higher grant levels for districts with low assessed value and perhaps provide just a minimum share to districts with very high property wealth that are able, for the most part, to meet their needs locally with local resources. Thirdly, we recommend adjusting the grant level for prior investment in state facilities. Now, let me explain what we mean by this. over the past 17 years, as you've heard, the state has provided significant resources to school districts across the state. $35.4 billion primarily in new construction and modernization funds. We believe as the state creates a new program that could potentially be very costly, that the state should prioritize funding to those districts that have not participated in a large way in the state program and have not already received significant state dollars. This could mean during the transition period adjusting those grant levels for state funds that districts have already received. Our fourth element, also addressing the transition, would be to provide one-time Proposition 98 funds to address the existing backlog of school facility projects, including modernization and new construction. There currently is $1.2 billion in applications that have been received by the State Allocation Board for projects that the state currently lacks bond authority for. And the state would have a few options in addressing that backlog. It certainly could use the current criteria under the SFP to award those funds. Given a lot of folks' concerns with those criteria and that method of distributing funds, the state could also open up a new funding round, look at new criteria to award to state priorities, for example, overcrowded schools, health and safety issues. Finally, we recommend that the state consider awarding those funds on an attendance basis, which would ensure that all school districts have at least some funding to address existing facility needs before transitioning to a new program. Finally, to address our concerns with accountability, we would recommend that the state require all school districts that receive state funds to create and adopt 5-year facility accountability plans. These plans would function on the facility side similar to the way the LCAPs function on the school operations side. So school districts would have significant flexibility to spend state and local funds on their local needs. However, these plans would demonstrate to the state the ways in which school districts are leveraging both those local and state resources to meet their maintenance needs, to deal with their future projected enrollment growth, and their major modernization projects. And the state will also want to consider any other accountability measures it might want to put in place, for example, a routine maintenance requirement, and whether that's appropriate in light of the new program. We believe that these broad design elements would help improve the current program and address a lot of the longstanding concerns that our office, the governor's office, and others have articulated with the existing school facility program. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions.
Sure.
Okay, thank you. Paul, did you want to add, or? Okay. All right, at this point, are there any questions from members of the committees? Senator Liu, any questions? Okay, I'll have just one. I really like the proposal by the LAO, which seems to borrow much from what the governor is suggesting too. The annualized stream of revenue to the schools as opposed to the ups and downs we've been experiencing makes a lot of sense. But sometimes schools will see a need 5 years down the road, 10 years for building a new school, which will be a large expense at once. Now, if they're given annualized money, is the proposal then that they would put that money into a reserve so that when they have a large need at one time, they'll be able to meet it? And if so, is the governor willing to waive reserve caps for that?
I think the concept is that, thanks for your question. I think the concept is that districts who receive these annualized funds and would be able to use them for any purpose. They certainly can, and we would encourage them to set them aside if they have future facilities needs and essentially bank up the money over several years. if they have a significant need in 1 year, having to build a new school or high school, for example, they can supplement those state funds with any combination of local funds, including local general obligation bonds, which is a tool they would still have. Again, for significant kind of existing one-time needs, we would, again, recommend those one-time funds to address that existing backlog to the extent there is current need for major projects right now. We would propose adjusting for district wealth to kind of increase the tools of low wealth districts. And certainly we would also entertain, kind of along the lines of the governor's proposal, increasing local tools to raise revenues, local bonding capacity, for example.